That's like an earworm, isn't it? Welcome, everyone. This is the 13th episode of my Project Hell webcast, and I'm Kelly Schockler. For the next 20 minutes, me and my partner in solving project management offenses and misdemeanors, Mr. Paul Thompson, we're going to kick around some simple and realistic solutions for a few everyday common project problems. And we're going to try to avoid the stuffy jargon that can muddle up these honest discussions.
And as Kelly said, I'm Paul Thompson. In this episode specifically, we're going to do things a bit different than some of the past. Today, we have a hot topic that we'll be discussing, but we're also going to play a game that our producer likes to call Love It or Lose It. Now, we encourage you guys to join in on the conversation using the chat, right? Share your thoughts and ideas as we talk about things with everyone there. If you have questions specifically for Kelly or I, throw those in Q&A. And if we have time at the end, we're going to try to get to them. All right. Now that everyone's on the edge of their seat, Kelly, why don't you reveal what today's hot topic is?
Kind of like on The Price is Right. And today's hot topic is, curtains pull back, the invisible sponsor. You know, the project sponsor who's almost impossible to connect with for any amount of time. They know they're the project champion and ultimately accountable for the final product or service, but they just seem a little bit too busy with other stuff to give you any time. And it's really hard to drive a project when your main person is missing in action. And not only that, but how are we supposed to, as project managers, get successful outcomes if our sponsors aren't engaging with us, even at a high level? Now, I've personally struggled with this dilemma in a few of my projects. I remember especially one project. It was early on in my career. It was my first big implementation for a high profile multi-work stream program that I was doing. And my executive sponsor was so nice and an affable VP, but he was not present at all and not doing what you'd expect a sponsor to do or to engage. And sure, he'd show up at steering committee meetings. He'd do a great job of pretending he was in the know, but it was all on me to block and tackle. And then I was spinning my wheels. I was thrashing around trying to get high level decisions and direction from him. So nothing was working at this point. Every time I tried to connect with him, he'd cancel my one-on-ones because he had other priorities, the stuff that really seemed legit. And so, you know, I found myself camping out on the doorstep of his office, waiting for him to spring on him and come so I could grab whatever few minutes I could to get his decisions and input, his strategic direction that I needed. Again, high profile, ambiguity, lots of tentacles reaching deep into the org, and it required his leadership. So I decided to get bold in that moment, and I asked his admin to put a 15-minute meeting on with him that had the subject urgent PM about to quit. Because I wanted to have a conversation with him about the impacts his invisibility was having on project progress and ultimately project success. And guess what? He kept that meeting. He showed up and it turned into an hour, and he received my input with all of the grace and humility I could have asked as a PM and could hope for. We level set together, and he committed to 3 times a week, 15-minute stand up with me and a few of the core workstream PMs. And the best part was he chose a trusted director of his to work with me as his representative when he couldn't make it. And this really made all the difference for me. But that invisible thing it really hampered progress.
Yeah, that can be really tough, right? Especially when you're the one expected to block and tackle on things that are, above your weight class and outside of your influential components within an organization. That's why we have sponsors, right? So I'm going to shift this a little bit and say, I think we need to look inward a bit. We need to look back at ourselves and go, am I driving the sponsor away? And by that, I mean, am I scheduling a half-hour meeting with them once a week that really has 5 minutes of information that they need, and then 25 minutes of information I just want to vomit up? Oftentimes we forget, right? Our sponsors are not project managers. They are not excited about some of the details that we get thrilled about, right? Um, they have very specific needs and ways that they can contribute. So we need to be sure to kind of put on their shoes and walk that mile and think about when we do set up meetings, when we do have conversations with them, are we speaking to their level of interest and effect, and where they can be effective, and really calling out just that. Oftentimes, I know I've had where we'll schedule half-hour meetings once a week. We get them down within the first few weeks to 5-10 minutes, and the sponsors love us because we're in, we're out, we've hit the high things that they need to know, we've asked the question we needed from them, and we've moved on, giving them back 20-25 minutes. So I'm going to suggest we look inward first before we blame some of our sponsor disappearances.
Good point. And maybe sounding like a broken record, but I think this goes back to setting expectations. It seems like a lot of our project hell situations come from us not setting expectations, especially with our sponsors. We just assume it's all going to flow and be all wonderful. But what we need to do is set those expectations with them right away, and not only our expectations for them, right, an agreement with them for what they're going to do, but us as PMs, you've got to let your sponsor know what you're bringing to the table to meet their needs and what they can expect from you. I think that's really important, and sometimes we forget to do it.
Right. What am I going to bring to them that they're going to value? That's good. That's good.
Yeah, that was a factor in my story. I didn't do that.
The other thing I want to mention that your sponsor sort of took and ran with, right? Set up a backup, set up an individual who could stand in for them if they were unavailable and make those important decisions, which helps a lot because inevitably, if you're working with a VP or a C-level executive, they have a lot on their plate. And sometimes it might be things as monumental as they're doing a merger and acquisition. So this project really became, minimal in their view, but setting up that backup really helps. The other thing we've done is guidance team. We oftentimes will set up a management guidance team, which is kind of at that supervisor manager level, much lower typically than our sponsor, but we'll let them kind of filter all the decisions. And really, if they can't make that decision, it's above their pay grade, those types of things, then it makes sense to go to the sponsor. But oftentimes about 80-90% of them will hit that guidance team, stop there, we'll get the answer and be able to move. You've also engaged a whole new level of the enterprise by bringing them into your project.
It's a lot more agile too. That's worked really well in past projects for me, that idea of a guidance team.
That's right. Good point on that agile, because you do need to make those decisions quickly, right? We cannot wait. We have a meeting once a week, and that's when we can next get a decision. So yeah. Good point. All right. So if you're keeping score, we're going to set expectations, right? We're going to find, we're going to keep our invisible sponsor from disappearing because we're setting up our expectations. We are looking to establish a management guidance team and make sure the sponsor has a backup or has a trusted individual that can stand in there for them. Of course, the first time that person makes a decision that your sponsor doesn't like, I'm going to bet that they show up for a lot more meetings.
Guaranteed.
All right. Well, that brings us to our Love It or Lose It segment of today's episode. And as I mentioned, this is our EP's little revenge on us. Katie goes out, looks for topics that are in the news, project management topics, and then throws them at us and asks, where do we land on these topics, right? Some of these, may in fact inspire deep dives for our hot topic later on. So what do you have for us, Katie?
All right. So the first one, Sending emails outside of work hours, love it or lose it.
I'm kind of a love it.
You're going to go first. You go first.
Okay, I'm kind of a love it. I'm kind of a love it because so I think oftentimes I will stack my emails up, not respond to everything constantly as my inbox is pinging throughout the day. So I might wait till I get home and then respond to them. Also, it doesn't hurt sometimes to let people know that you are keeping track of things in the evening if they need to get a hold of you. So I'm a love it.
I'm going to lose it. I mean, unless what you're involved in requires it, of course, there are those times, but I don't like how it perpetuates the 24/7, 365 hamster wheel that everyone complains about and allows companies to continually take advantage of their employees. And of course, if you're working with teammates in other time zones or you have a go live that's happening and requires that 24/7 and the project depends on after hours communications, I'm really talking about checking email after hours every day and then getting swept into work mode when it's not necessary, because the world ain't going to stop if you're not answering at 8 or 9 p.m. So again, goes back to one of my favorite topics of setting boundaries. If not answering emails is important to you, then set your boundaries around it. Let people know. And if you don't care and you enjoy being tied to your work email 24/7 because you think that's going to help you scale the corporate ladder, then go that route. No shame, no judgment. Do what works.
No shame, no judgment.
Yeah.
All right, we got another email one here. BCCing people on emails, love it or lose it.
Can I go first on this one, Paul?
You got it.
Okay. So I'm glad this is something you brought up, Katie, for love it or lose it, because I say 99% lose it and 1% love it. So let's talk about the 99% reasons to lose it. I mostly see people using BCC to fly under the radar and call out and entrap others for their personal gain. And receiving an email from someone and not knowing that their manager or some other non-relevant person has been secretly added to BCC is also just unprofessional. So if you want to share an email that you wrote on, under the radar, then forward it to the person. It takes 2 seconds. So what about the 1%? Okay, so the right way to use BCC is, say, when you have a peer and they want to introduce you to someone. And so now there's 3 people in this conversation and you don't want that person that made the introduction to listen to all your conversation and the good time to meet up, right? So you move them into BCC and that immediately takes them out of the loop, right? And they won't be in the thread anymore to endure any further chitter chatter.
Yeah, well, I do agree with that 1%, right? When you've kind of moving somebody off, just saying thank you and moving you to BCC and ending your participation.
Yeah.
I'm a big lose it because I have seen too many times you BCC somebody, they didn't pay attention and pick up that it was a BCC. And all of a sudden they're jumping into this conversation. You're going, they weren't on the thread. How did they get into? Oh,
Oops.
great. So these guys that are emailing me have all these people in BCC. I see what they're doing, right? And it starts to get pretty adversarial quick. So I say lose it. I can't really, aside from the one thing you suggested, Kelly, I can't see a reason to use BCC anymore.
Yeah, me either. I'm glad we agree on this, Paul.
Kind of strange.
Right?
All right. And then our next one, again, kind of relating to email, using Slack or Teams or any other kind of like collaboration app, using that instead of email, love it or lose it.
Yeah. All right. I'll take a swing at this one. So I'm gonna say lose it from one. It's not really a love it or lose it, right? But I'm gonna say lose it. So we had, in fact, not long ago, a PM on our show, and her struggle was Some of our team was big on using Teams and Slack. Others wanted to use email, and they were kind of unable to communicate because they were on different channels and everything was going sideways. So the other piece I often see, and this is abused on email, it's abused in Slack, is the thread from hell, right? It just keeps going on and on and on in email, or you reuse an old email thread and that gets going. Slack, instead of doing a reply to, they're just continuing everything, you know, you're trying to read 47 pages back on what really happened. I do love the tools when they're used, but this gets back to what Kelly's always bringing up, right? Set those expectations. How are we going to use it? Which channel are we going to use for what? And oftentimes it's really about using all the channels, because we do need to reach people in the method that they're comfortable with. So it's not always a either or, just understand that they can be a mess.
Yeah. Surprise, I agree with you. I love Slack. I love Teams. I love email, but for very different reasons. So if we're just talking about communicating about project decisions and issues, I'm going to go with email. It's interesting. I meet monthly with my old PMO team from a company I used to work with, and this topic came up, and they were all saying the same thing as you were saying, Paul. It's messy, different departments using different tools and protocols for communicating. They couldn't find stuff easily. It was getting buried in those chat and those channel threads, and I think that's our experience too. So like, set up a protocol in your project. How are things going to roll? Otherwise, it's this free-for-all nightmare with different conversations going on in Slack or Teams channels, and documents are hidden down in layers, and everyone's doing their own thing. So have a discussion, get input, set a standard, onboard everyone, and stick with it. That's my 2 cents.
Okay. Next up, 4-day work week. Love it or lose it.
So I love this, of course. Who doesn't love this? It might be you, Paul. That's another conversation. Look, Iceland just came out with their study data a few weeks ago. Some of you might have seen that, where they trialed a 4-day work week. I think it was around 35, 36 hours, and they used about 2,500, I think 2,500 government workers, and they're calling it an overwhelming success because the workers were able to shift to shorter hours without impacting their productivity. And the researchers are calling it a groundbreaking evidence for the efficacy of working reduced hours. So, you know, and then I think we have to look at the research out there that shows diminishing returns on productivity the more hours you put in, right? The 40 versus 50 versus 60, that the more you go towards 60, your productivity plummets. So, I mean, one thing I think we need to be aware of in this, though, this is all about the white collar workers, and it's easy to do it with them. But what about the hourly workers? You know, they would see a reduction in their income if their hours were reduced. So I'd like to see more discussion and innovation on addressing that particular aspect of the workforce, but I do love this.
And while I appreciate Iceland for its huge contribution to the economic growth of the world, and so its productivity matters, I'm going to be a little more meh. As a project manager, as a business owner. I am less concerned about days of the week, or days in a week, or hours. What is important from my perspective is, if you've been given a task and you committed to it, you need to meet it, right? Sometimes that's going to mean making a weekend sacrifice. Sometimes it's going to mean finishing up a day ahead and being able to make a 3-day weekend. So I'm really more about completing your commitments and getting the work done than days of the week.
Very American of you.
All right, I think we can squeeze one more in. Using Excel for scheduling, love it or lose it?
Yeah, All right. I'm gonna lose it. And it's not that I haven't done this dozens of times, right? But there are far too many affordable project scheduling apps or SaaS applications available today. I think it's time to let Excel become the financial tool that it's great at and use it for our budgets, and then move scheduling to some tools that have come around within the last 10, 15 years that are much more adept at creating the lists and sharing those lists and collaborating with those lists. So they really do take it beyond just a list in Excel.
So I agree with everything you said, Paul, but I am thankful that Excel has not been sunsetted yet. Not that it ever will be, but here's why. I work with a lot of nonprofits and smaller organizations, and they can't always afford the latest collaboration apps with scheduling features, but they have Excel. And it's just fine for creating schedules and checklists for the projects that they're doing. Is the user interface amazing and dazzling to look at? No. Is it cumbersome to use to get some of the information you want? Yep. Is it easy to pull metrics out? No, but it still can work, especially for those who are on a tight budget. And you know, project managers have tracked schedules using Excel before Smartsheet, Asana, Trello, and the rest, right? So not perfect, but for these smaller projects and organizations who can't really afford that stuff, I think it's good.
But you know, if you take advantage of all those extra features, you might be able to reduce your workload and get back that fourth day of your week. And
right. Well,
out
there's
the
that.
3-day weekend.
There's that. You know, it's like look at the cost benefit ratio of actually paying for one of these apps compared to all the time that you're wasting trying to pull and extract and manage a schedule in Excel. So, right on.
Great. Well, thanks for playing. And we're out of time. So why don't you guys take us out?
All right.
All right.
So interesting perspectives today. We agreed on some things. We had different opinions on others, but let's be honest, these topics are not always black and white. There's gray areas. So Katie, thanks for keeping Paul and I in line. I know it's a difficult job. And for our listeners, you know, drop us some love it or lose it ideas, or maybe even jump into our coaches corner for one of our episodes. We would love to have you. And the way you do that is just drop us an email at myprojecthell@gmail.com. Get our attention that way and we'll schedule you in.
That's right. And I hope everybody enjoyed the show. I know Kelly and I did. We really do have fun doing these things. You can always catch us on the replays on My Project Hell episodes over on our YouTube channel. Also, don't forget, you know, our website has a lot of good information. And if you did have some questions that we weren't able to get to, hit Kelly and I, or, you know, either of us up for a free 30-minute consultation. Just check out our websites. The schedulers for each of us is out there. All right. So enjoy.
All right, everyone. Join us in the next episode. Take care.